blah, blah. Like, I feel like you have to kind of explain around that
Okay.
how God can see us as justified because there was a perfect offering.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
does that make sense?
That does make sense. Make it make sense.
Yeah, yes. Make it make sense to everyone else.
I know what you mean, but let's say it for the other people that may not understand that fully.
Ready to dive deeper into your spiritual journey? Join Dave Drum and Ben Garcia as they explore the raw, honest, and nuanced experiences of modern spiritual men. Here is something to chew on.
Did you hear that when I walked out? No.
Well, so it's like, what did I say?
Right.
It's like at work, our body cameras.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big button. The button's literally this big on my vest. So like, there's days where you do one of these,
It's on.
and it's on all of a sudden. And after it's been recording for 15 minutes, it just chirps at you to let you know, hey, I'm still recording.
Right.
And one day I'm sitting in my car and it chirps, but it's the same chirp for the low battery. And I look down and I'm like, oh, it shouldn't be dead. Oh, crap. And then I'm like,
What just happened?
I'm in my car by myself. What have I said? Who did I talk to on the phone?
Right.
So, and depending upon where I hold my phone,
I could hear the other person.
right. So it's like, so, turn it off, wait for it to upload, go back, play my video, and I'm just sitting there watching my steering wheel for 15 minutes, waiting to hear what sounds in the background. And literally for 15 minutes, there were like I was on my computer for a minute, so you hear that, and then like it's nothing. I had just stopped and gotten coffee, so it's like, there's a couple shots of my hand going up for coffee, but it's like, whew. You capture any random 15-minute time period in my patrol car, you don't know what's gonna happen. I mean, think about it. Capture any random 15-minute portion of your day.
Of your day, just sitting there working.
And you're like, well,
Wish that was on tape.
Lucy, you got some explaining to do.
Right.
All
So, got some big news for you, Dave.
Yeah, what's that?
I lost my yellow tag.
Oh, that is sad.
That is sad, man. It was a very sad day. I got up.
Those are not easy to come by right now.
No, they're not.
It's a fish.
It's a fish.
A yellow tang.
I'd always wanted one. I think they're really cool looking. And I got a little juvenile, so he wasn't fully yellow. He was like really pale, So I kind of thought like, why isn't he yellow yet? But read a little bit about it. But he was doing really good. And then
Then he wasn't.
Right. Well, I didn't realize they're herbivores, so I've been feeding just mice and shrimp the whole time. And like
All tangs like a little bit of salad.
yeah, I didn't know that. So I woke up one day and looking, and he's like just kind of like swimming in the same place, looking awkward, like nose up. And I was like, man, what's going on here? So I do a little video of it, and I'm Googling, and like, oh, they like this. So by the end of the day, I could see like a thread coming out, like he was constipated is what it was from eating all that protein, protein. And so I went and got some herb drops and put them in there. And
You get the seaweed.
seaweed pellets. Well, I had that, the nori thing, but he wasn't taken to that.
That's weird.
Yeah, he just wasn't. He wasn't a picker in general. I don't know.
The seaweed's usually good because it also lets them get some aggression out because they have to rip it.
Yeah, this guy, I don't know if he just wasn't fully mentally developed yet, Frontal lobe wasn't there yet.
It could have been its previous owner.
Right. But, so yeah, I nursed him back for like 2 days, and then Saturday,
And then not.
he was not happy. Like, come in there, and he's like laying sideways, but I could see gills, and he's fluttering. I'm like, come on, man, you can do it, buddy. Get up.
Clear.
No, he did not make it till noon. Sadness, dude. Sadness.
All right. So now that we've discussed your your Aquarius.
That's where my mental faculties are.
Death. So, speaking of death.
Okay.
So, when I was in the 2nd grade, I went to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school.
Sorry to hear that.
Grew up that way. And when I was in the 2nd grade, I had an uncle that passed away. He had lung cancer, and he passed away. And he was a very lively person. Like, I have very fond memories of him, even at such a young age. And my cousins, his kids are, again, like some of the most entertaining family members I have. They're just fun to be around. And so is he. So in the 2nd grade, I remember waking up one morning. My mom had been at the hospital apparently all night, and my dad got us ready for school, which was not the norm for us.
A little odd, yeah.
And I remember my dad telling us that he passed away. I didn't even know that I knew what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And I went to school, and I was sad. And I remember telling my teacher, Sister Teresa, she had the blue habit. She was a blue nun, so it was blue. It wasn't black and white. She wore light blue and white. But anyways,
Sister Teresa.
it's
a good name.
Flying nun thing.
Yeah.
So I tell her that my uncle died, and she's like, I remember her saying, and it's snapshots because I'm a little older than 2nd grade now.
Revisionist history.
Yeah. But I remember her saying, like, okay, well, we're going to pray, because we would pray at the beginning of the day. We'd pray at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And she does this prayer. I had to Google it, the prayer of St. Gertrude. And I could be wrong about the number, but for some reason, I remember her saying, like, it releases souls from purgatory to go to heaven. And I wanted to say it was like 1,000 souls.
How do you know your uncle was one of those souls?
Well, you don't. You don't.
You just saved some other people, and now your uncle gets to step into purgatory?
I don't know. So we do this prayer. And it wasn't like one of our normal prayers that we, because as Catholics, you have certain, like, regular prayers.
Ritualistic?
You can use that word.
I did.
You did. And I remember, and what I've learned as I've gotten older, is if you have a specific memory when you were young, chances are there's emotion attached to it. That's why it's imprinted in your brain. So you can actually figure out what that emotion was, and it helps you kind of process the interaction a little bit as an adult. But anyways, I remember feeling good about that. Like, oh, okay. So we go through the school day, and I remember approaching Sister Teresa at the end of the school day, asking to do it again. Like, I wanted
the same prayer. You wanted to do it again.
If this is good, let's do it again.
Right.
And I remember being confused and a little bit bothered by the fact that she told us, no, we can't do it again.
You can only pray the purgatory prayer once?
Well, once a day or whatever, but it's like, why wouldn't we do that all the time?
Yeah.
Like, maybe we could just, okay, it's your tag, you're it.
Yeah.
You read it now. Like, let's let them all out.
Right. If it's 1,000, yeah. We got all day here, sister.
There were times where you would go pray the rosary, and it's like a certain number of Hail Marys, and then Our Father, and so some of us grew up with this idea of prayer as scripted.
Right.
A set of words in a specific order, said a certain way. Even to the point of last year, there was a Catholic diocese out in Arizona. They invalidated like 20 or 30 years worth of baptisms.
I heard about that.
Because the priest was baptizing these babies,
right?
Sprinkling the water,
yeah.
And he would say, "We baptize you
right,
in the name
instead
of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit," instead of I baptize.
I saw that, and like, what?
So the thing is, if your baptism isn't valid,
right,
then your first communion isn't valid, your reconciliation isn't valid, your confirmation, your marriage, or if you became a priest, your ordination, because they're building blocks. And it's like,
what? Yeah, like,
I don't.
That is like taking taken the God out of it and inserted human.
Because
And
they're not magic spells.
Right,
They were
well-
never meant to be magic spells. I mean, there was a time in the Bible where
Right.
the disciples came to Jesus and say, hey, teach us to pray like you pray.
right, and he gave a good example of
Because he says, pray when you pray, pray like this.
Right. Don't pray this specifically, but pray like this. In that, address your prayer in this fashion.
Yeah, and it gave a very good template, which a lot of us would call, the Lord's Prayer or
Lord's
Our
Prayer,
Father.
right.
And it's, you can map out, thanking God for being God and that gratitude and
Yeah.
acknowledging who He is and
Mm-hmm.
asking for your needs and asking for forgiveness and there's this progression of thought through that you can map out.
Right.
And ultimately, commending yourself to His will.
Right.
But I think a lot of us don't, or we'll say like, oh, we're going to pray before a meal and
Bless the meal. Yeah.
rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub.
That's right, man.
It's
That's a good one. My wife's grandfather would say, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the one with the longest arm gets the most. Yeah, but I mean, it's how we humans have created. It's like the 600 and some rules that we attached that with
the nation of Israel.
With the nation of Israel, and when Moses came out and in Exodus and rescued them and brought them into the world, God gave commandments to teach them how to rely on Him, more than to teach them do this, don't do that. It was more creating a heart posture for them, and then we take it to the nth degree. Like you say,
if these words are good, nail them down and make them ultimate.
Right. So thinking about that story, we're sitting here saying, she said, no, you can't do it twice. But you were in that moment as a kid trying to do that. Well, if this is good, let's do it again. But I mean, maybe there was a reason why you only do it once for a person that passed.
Or it could have just been, that was not in the plan for the day.
For that day.
And she was just like, to the second grader. Oh, yeah,
Reel it in, Dave.
Yeah, like, we're not going to do this all the time.
Did you take your ADHD meds today?
Yeah. Well, that wasn't a thing when I was in second grade. I mean, if it was a thing when I was in second grade, I guarantee that would have been me.
Yeah.
Anyways, so then, if we look at it now, and we're saying, okay, it's not a specific list of words. I remember hearing a pastor say it, and I think we've had the conversation before, where it's like, prayer is, God knows our heart. God knows our thoughts. God knows our mind. He created our mind. So he already knows what's rattling around in our head. And, I think about like mowing my grass later. We all kind of just get lost in our thoughts.
That's a good time to really process some stuff.
Well, God knows those thoughts, and prayer is inviting Him into the conversation. It is, I think too often in American Christianity, we've turned prayer into wishing in God's direction.
Right.
Or worrying at God.
Worrying at God, yeah.
Not like, here, God, this is all yours and I can't carry it.
Yeah.
And giving it over to Him, it turns into this like, God, I wish I might, get this job I applied for tonight.
Right. So is that like us, like you said, worrying in His direction or wishing, or is that us truly, just having that conversation? I mean, like you said, prayer is an open conversation between us and God, Jesus died on the cross so that we could have that relationship.
Right. So we no longer need a priest to approach the throne of God. We have a high priest in Jesus.
Yeah. So is that a bad thing? Or given like, okay, we talk about heart posture and trying to give it all to God and making sure that our heart's in the right position as we're praying to Him. But, if we're just like sitting there worrying about something, and it does kind of turn into this like almost crying out, is that's still a prayer.
I think so. I mean, the Bible talks about groans too deep for words.
Right.
Where, whether it's sorrow or anguish or whatever, like you don't have to have the words to express the emotion.
That's it.
Because God knows.
So are those ritualistic prayers void in your eyes, your opinion?
No. Because if they give words to your thoughts,
Right.
then that would never be a bad thing.
Right.
And I don't think the heart behind them are a bad thing. I think in typical human fashion, we've taken it's our attempt to like almost like this would
Control in some
we
way?
we could we talk about like men's groups and small groups, and the quest for authentic manhood was a huge part of your
Sure.
spiritual growth.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't a huge part of mine. Now, does that make the things that were significant to me
Make you less of a man than me? We won't go there. No.
and like so many rabbit holes.
Yeah, we'll just leave that one alone.
Yeah. But just because it was impactful to you doesn't mean it's going to be impactful for me.
Right.
Just because a specific Bible verse really speaks to me in a season doesn't make it a better Bible verse than another season.
Yeah.
None of these, because you can look over the course of Christianity, and there are standardized prayer books in every denomination.
Yeah.
Or
the promise book, which is just a list of verses, but they like group them by emotions essentially.
Yes. So I think a lot of times it was, and again, when you go back to the history of it, these are churches who were dealing with a population that was uneducated and many times couldn't read. So if I can give you a standardized prayer, like, hey, pray this, and it's something I can memorize, because again, growing up in a Catholic school, like that was an assignment, recite the Our Father, from memory, and we would have to do it every day, and so some of it was teaching uneducated people how to pray,
right?
Because they couldn't read for themselves the Bible. Because you're also talking about a time where maybe you have an English-speaking population, and the Bible wasn't in English yet.
Yeah, that's true. So how does talk about the Lord's Prayer? How does things like the Sinner's Prayer or the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, those are prayers, kind of, but they're also really, in my mind, you're just, like you say, remembering, reciting something, and you might recite it 100 times, but maybe only 20 of them you like felt it. I've caught myself doing that. We say grace before dinner, and we have the thank you, Father, for for the food, that prayer. And Logan will say it sometimes, my 8-year-old, and he's memorized it. It's like, whoa, slow down.
What does that mean?
Yeah, slow down. Think about those. Thank you for this food. And how many times do we do those ritualistic prayers, and they're just empty words, a banging gong,
Because there is no emotion behind it.
Right.
Because it's no longer a conversation. We're just speaking the words out loud to go through emotion.
Right. And when we do that, does that become, what's he use? He uses a word like I hate your prayers at one point. I forget, Jeremiah or one.
So, right. The nation of Israel is going through the motions. They're following the letter of the law. They're offering up all their
Your offerings are detestable to me. Yeah.
He's like, because when you talk about those offerings, when you look at the way they were supposed to be presented, there's a phrase, an aroma pleasing to God,
right?
Which is barbecue, by the way.
Barbecue, absolutely.
is an aroma. If you know what I'm talking about, that makes total sense. But it's an aroma pleasing to the Lord, and God says at that point, because they're going through the actions, but their heart is far from Him.
Right.
And He's like, it's a stench.
Right. So when we're
it's a
doing
stench.
those ritualistic prayers, just because we were taught you have to say this, does that become, in your opinion, obviously what we're saying is just two guys talking about it. We're not saying this is the end all be all, but do you think that when we fall into those habits that they are just empty words? You know?
Well, we don't want any portion of our actions, or, if I think it applies not just words but actions. Anything that should be directed or used to glorify, praise, worship God, or enter into His presence, anything like that, that we're just mindlessly going through it. So like, we have the ability to do automated offering, through the church website, where it's just you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
And I remember setting that up at one point, and weeks going by, and I never thought about it.
And then never prayed for the tithe or something.
And I thought, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that because, Bible says God loves a cheerful giver. Like, I should be able to do
Acknowledge
this.
that, yeah.
So I want to do it intentionally, not by default. Like, my retirement contributions come out and I don't even think about it.
Right.
I don't care that I don't think about that.
Right.
It just happens. I'm glad I have that ability to do it.
Yeah.
But to giving back to the one who gave it to me in the first place.
That needs to be intentional.
I want to be like, you
Yeah.
gave me this. You gave me all of this.
Right.
And you asked me for just a little bit back. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree, man. We had that too, because in our house, my wife kind of takes care of the books. I just, here's what I have, babe, make it work. And so we tithe, and she's done it. And it was just a few months ago that I had a similar thought, like, wow, I've been tithing consistently for years and years, but over these last 2 years, I haven't thought about it once. And used to be, you take it and you put the check in the thing, or you cash. We were on the envelope method there, the Dave Ramsey.
Plan.
Yeah, we did that. And so that was a thing, and I had to fight that heart posture for, I want people to see me putting this envelope in the bucket, that's a whole nother something, but
That's an episode all by itself.
yeah. But I had that recognition that, like, hey, it's become an afterthought, as opposed to that should be a first thought,
right.
And that's something that we've gotten better at. I've gotten better at being a part of at least that action,
Well, so basically, we're talking around this intentionality aspect of it, to stamp a word over it,
Right.
is back to that prayer idea.
Yeah.
Because we had our last episode where we talked through kind of that. Hey, what's it mean to be a Christian to us?
Yeah.
In that conversation.
Right.
And
kind of
as Christians, we use words.
Right.
That I heard a joke the other day. This comedian says there's only two groups of people that sing about blood, like death metal and Christians.
Right. That
And
wasn't a joke. That was a
was that part of
Maddie C, man?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like,
that's awesome.
You are not wrong.
Right. Heavy metal and Christians, they sing about blood.
It's like, I never really thought about that. But we use that word.
Yeah.
And, to someone who didn't grow up around this, talking about someone spilling blood, you're like, ew?
What do you guys got to do? If you pull a snake out of that thing, I am out of here.
A tambourine and a plastic sword.
Right. So we were talking about what is a Christian,
and it Christianese.
It led us into that. What other words could we help define? I guess.
Well, and define, but also to maybe put some understanding around it,
right.
Because I think even as Christians, people will use a word and not understand exactly what, you know, I made the comment in the last episode, we use the same glossary, but not the same dictionary
Right,
sometimes.
yeah.
Like we use the same list of words, but we are not defining them the same.
Not even close sometimes.
and-
Yeah, and
and
that's how.
over time, I think we've, not even intentionally, so I hate to use the word hijacked, but we've adapted the word to fit our actions versus changing our actions to fit the word.
To fit the word. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. So we were just
So we were kind of all that to talk about prayer.
prayer, right? Well, that was the first one. I mean, we brought a list of
We got a
different
list of
words. We like words.
Because words mean things, right?
They do, and they mean different things to different people, and that's kind of the point of what
And
we're
that's the
talking.
problem.
Yeah.
Is they do mean different things to
Right.
different people. When they probably should mean the same thing to a
Right.
lot of those people.
Right, and I don't even think this was on there. Love, like we hear that often.
I love tacos. I love my dog.
Right, love my
I
wife.
love my wife.
Right, those
I love
aren't
my
the
kids.
same loves.
They're not this.
Right, so
I love coffee.
Right.
As I grip my coffee mug.
clutch it, white knuckled it.
I feel like in every episode I've made some reference to
Some
my
coffee reference. So if you're not watching, Dave loves coffee and he loves the.
It smells good too.
It smells good too. Yeah. So
But I digress.
we've used that one every time too. So another one that we thought was really good. Put a bow on prayer. Faith.
Faith.
You know, and I have faith that my car's going to start. You know, and I have faith in God, and I have faith in my wife. You know,
I think people underestimate how much faith they have in their daily life.
in their daily life, absolutely.
When my light turns green,
Yeah.
I have an extraordinary amount of faith in the rest of humanity
Right.
that they are going to obey
Yeah.
what their red light means.
Right. I mean, you think about driving down the road, 70, 50, whatever, and that little yellow stripe is keeping someone else on the other side from just head on, you know, and in your line, you've seen where they didn't respect that, you know.
Yeah.
But faith is, for me anyway, you know, I heard it described as using the car reference, like faith in God is, you're taking that first step, right? God will meet you there, but he wants you to take that first step. And like when you're driving down the road at nighttime and you have your headlights on, you can't see further than your headlights, but you keep going at whatever rate of speed you're going on that roadway at that point. And that's faith. And that's was a really elementary view of faith in God. As long as you keep moving forward, he's going to be there. He's going to continue to illuminate the road for you, you know. And I think sometimes when we talk about faith, we can get lost in, oh, I got to have this really big faith in God to take care of all of my problems, which you should, you know. But sometimes it's just a simple, I need to be faithful, you know, and
Well, 'cause
read the Bible.
Faith is not an absence of doubts. It's choosing to trust
Right.
in the midst of your doubts.
Right.
Because faith is an action, it's not an emotion.
Right.
Like I had heard, you know, kind of one of those same analogies was, you know, when you're on a train and you get into a tunnel, you don't hop off the train
Right.
because you can't see where you're going. You trust the conductor.
Right.
You choose. Let's face it. If you're flying in an airplane, again,
Yeah.
the amount of faith you have, I think we underestimate how many people are involved in keeping that plane in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of dudes or girls up there in the cockpit.
Right.
But there was a lot more dudes and girls who had their hands all over
that thing.
plane.
The rivets and the screws and
The gas. Like, let's trust that gauge is ding, 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 ding. Is that working?
Is anybody in there?
Yeah, exactly. So we again. So faith is, you know, when we talk about faith, I think it's important to understand where we're placing our faith.
Yeah.
We have faith in other people. We have faith in occupations. We have faith in physical things. But when we're talking about faith in God, I think we underestimate the importance of even small faith.
Right.
Be like, people will say I'm having a crisis of faith, or I'm struggling with my faith, or my faith feels weak. I think in those moments, God can be so close and so loving in those weak moments, probably even more so than when my faith is strong.
Right. You had said it like faith isn't the absence of doubt. And I think that's really good for a listener that might be struggling with something, whatever's going on in their life, unspoken prayer or unspoken issue that they're going with, and having that doubt, but then having the wherewithal to bring that doubt to him, like you say. It's not an absence of doubt, but Jesus talks about the faith the size of a mustard seed, and for us and nowadays, some of those parables and those biblical references are hard for us to grasp, in Western society, where we can go to the grocery store and buy any fruit, vegetable from any part of the world at any time of year, whereas back in that day, there was
a season.
There was a season for everything, and thinking about like the mustard seed being one of the smallest ones, and then it grows and
becomes a tree.
And time to get up. Sorry.
Your turn.
Just how the little faith we have, and you talked about God coming beside us in those moments. If we're in that doubt, feel like we're lacking faith, how that small amount of faith, when we give it to God or bring it to God, how He can encourage us, how He can come beside us, comfort us, and the faith grows in that. Because we feel that presence, like you said, you gave that reference. That's in those moments is when we can start to feel His presence even more.
Yeah. So it's words like these that can, I don't know, help us a little bit in those weaker times, to know that God's got us, and that, because we don't bring a lot to the table in terms of our story with God. Like,
Speak for yourself, bro.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I bring failure, I bring
Right.
doubt, I bring sin, I bring
a great example of what not to do on your way.
Yeah, those are the things. I add nothing to my holiness. I add, there's another word, holiness, like
Right. What is holy?
God. So, we do nothing but diminish what He has, and that can cause us to spiral a little bit. And understanding where these words like faith and trust and hope can help anchor us in those weaker times. Because, again, it's like faith is like discipline, where it's like, when I'm motivated to go to the gym, when I'm motivated to exercise, when I'm motivated to get up and do my, check off my to-do list, I don't need any discipline in that.
Right.
It's the times when I'm not motivated that I need to make choices, and discipline is a choice and trust is a choice. So when I feel close to God, when I feel like I'm just walking the walk He's called me to, this lane I'm supposed to be in, like, I feel good about it. Like, I don't need to choose to trust, because it's just easy on those days.
Right.
But it's important to understand that those words actually mean something, because the time is coming. It's not an if, it's a when.
It's a when, yeah.
That you're going to struggle a little bit, and you're not going to feel so close, and God's going to seem a little quieter or a little further away. He's not,
Right.
But you feel that way.
The
so
feeling.
In those moments, you make the choice. Like, God, I trust you. It's a choice. It's an action. I have faith in you. It's a choice. It's an action. It's not an emotion. And you just choose to remain in that place.
Right.
Regardless of what else is happening out here, I'm going to stay in this place.
Right. being faithful and full of faith, right? That was a line that a pastor used about worship, which is another topic.
And then how about we take a quick break and we
Yeah.
come back and we jump on the worship soapbox.
The worship train, yeah. Are people getting too close? Breathing in your bubble? Say goodbye to awkward hugs and overly friendly coworkers with nope strips. The revolutionary new way to say nope. Back it up, Brenda. Simply apply one nope strip to your forehead, elbows, or navel and enjoy the smell of week-old sardines and emotional baggage. It's like pepper spray for friendships. Perfect for introverts, misanthropes, or people who just hate people. Visit nopestrips.gov, not .com. We got kicked off and used code Space Invaders for a restraining order shaped sticker. Nope strips.
Nope. Okay.
Yeah.
So hey, we're back.
Right.
Dave, you're Ben.
Sure am.
This is something to chew on. And today we're talking about words.
Words.
Word them up, y'all.
Use your words, please. Yeah.
Use your words.
Right.
And before the break, we were talking about prayer and we were talking about faith and trust and just kind of the way Christians use them and making sure, again, we're all defining the words.
Defining them correctly, yeah.
The same way.
We tend to use the same word in different ways. You use the same glossary, different dictionary.
Yeah.
That's a really good analogy, especially for the topic that we're talking about today.
Yeah. So another one that I think you and I have both, we've voiced actually a little bit of frustration at times.
Yeah.
To each other, outside of this setting, or actually, I guess it would be this setting where it's just the two of us
Chatting,
having random thoughts. 'Cause
Right.
That's how this all started, anyways.
Yeah.
But it's this idea of worship.
Worship, yes.
Worship, because in what we would call Western evangelical culture,
Right.
for those not paying attention to words, we'll just call it the American church right now has a worship culture,
Right.
which means music and lights and smoke machines
Right.
at church.
We would call that corporate worship, right? And that's I think that's where our frustration kind of came from when we think about worship. It's like, all right, everybody, get on your feet. We're going to worship, And I think that, like,
And to put the disclaimer on it first, we're not saying there's anything wrong with,
true, absolutely.
at the beginning of our church service,
Right.
the church we attend, that we all stand,
Yeah.
a team of musicians who are gifted and talented by
Very,
God,
very talented.
to do that,
Right.
to sing well, to play musical instruments, and there are sound people and there are light people and there's equipment that we use, and there's a lot going on.
Yeah, they create an environment.
They create an environment to kind of get everybody ready for
the message.
the message.
Yeah, and I think that
And there's nothing wrong with that.
there is not anything wrong with that.
But I think at times, especially maybe new Christians, don't realize you worship God. Let me rephrase that. You worship something.
You worship a lot of things sometimes.
You worship things every day of your life by your actions and words.
Like that coffee, do you, Dave?
I do. Mainly in the morning.
Right.
But it's worshiping God, again, is a choice.
It is a choice.
And it's laying aside everything else. And how we worship God says a lot about who we are. And just like, we were talking about, a prayer isn't a magic spell that has to be done a certain way.
Right.
I absolutely agree. What we just described with the lights and the stage and the musicians, that you can worship God like that.
In that setting,
A
yeah.
1000%
Right.
agree.
But
It's not the only way
Yeah.
to worship.
I think that's where a lot of people might get a little bit confused, like you say, a new Christian or even some people that have been going to church for a while, as I worship God in my car listening to K-Love or Way FM or something, and I worship God on that 15-minute 3-song set before the pastor comes out and talks, but there's so many other ways, like you say, we worship other things throughout our day, but we can worship God. It's not just the music, it's a way of life. It's a lifestyle of us bringing things to Him, in our frustration, our faith, also choosing to put Him before other things in our life. I'm thinking about when we're, I lost my train of thought there. I apologize.
Well, so you said it's we choose to basically make much of His name, to glorify
Right.
Him, to lift Him up, exalt Him. It's our adoration, our like over an outflow of recognition that He's God, we're not. Dare I say, this podcast
Right.
is a form of worship.
Yeah.
Because we are making much of His name
Right.
through our actions. I can worship God while if I decide to, we finish up recording and I go home and it's like, I'm gonna take a walk around my neighborhood. Now, some people would say, oh, that's just a prayer walk. Well,
Right.
I don't know that one is necessary. It can't be one and not the other.
Right.
It both and.
Yeah.
Where it's I can just be walking and you know us, we like to hike, we like to go on vacation,
Sure.
we like to go hiking and we hike the Grand Canyon and we hiked a small portion of the Appalachian Trail once and just like different places we've gone. In those locations, I can look around and be like, wow, this is cool. This is neat. I'm in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I've made it all the way down to the Colorado.
Right.
I can say it like that, or I can look around and be like,
Wow.
God, like, thank you for making this.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
it is the manner in which I choose to recognize that which I see.
Right. The heart posture.
And to thank God for that, to worship God, to, is there a specific word that I have to use in order for someone to say, okay, now you're worshiping God? No. I think it's when I'm just in full submission, surrender, and, exposing myself to God, where it's like, I have nothing to add to this, yet you let me be a part of it.
Right.
I have nothing to add, but you let me be a part.
Yeah.
May be, for me, the best way to enter into that worship mindset.
Yeah. So it really is a lifestyle, a life of worship by bringing everything to Him, dedicating everything to, like you say, whether you're walking the Grand Canyon, Appalachian Trail, or being grateful for the home you live in, scrubbing the floors or something like that. That might sound odd to somebody, but if you're, this is my belief anyway, if you're grateful and you're thankful in those moments and you're doing that with a sincere heart, that is a form of worshiping Him, because as we talked about the tithe a little bit, it's all His. It's all His. And when we're just...
So the tithe could even be part of your worship.
I would agree with that 100%, and for us to be able to recognize that it's all His and He's allowing us to be a part of it, flourish in whatever way, I believe that it's all a part of worship. It's not just the music, though that is a part of it. I think that it's a lifestyle and a way of adoration for Him.
Right, the heart posture, like you were saying.
Yeah.
It's just, I think maybe for those who aren't Christians and can't totally connect with that thought process of the worship experience.
Right.
You say worship, and they're picturing, like the Mayans at a temple, all lined
Yeah.
up, chanting, bowing, stuff like that. That's worship. I would say if you could take that visual and make that an experience for you here and here, in your head and in your heart.
Thank you.
That is actually a little bit correct.
Yeah.
Like
So
they stop what they're doing to acknowledge their creator, their God. So obviously I'm not saying that they were worshiping the correct thing, but that you could take that mental image of stop what you're doing and recognize your creator and recognize how little you actually bring to the table.
Right.
In light of what he is the table.
Yeah, you kind of started off worship with you are worshiping something, and think there's a lot of times when people don't realize that they're worshiping something other than God, or even they're worshiping an experience and not Him in those those moments. Thinking about the corporate worship setting, they're getting lost in the entertainment factor of it versus what that entertainment is supposed to produce in them,
Well, because you'll hear people say like, "Oh, I didn't like the worship set today."
I didn't like that song.
Oh. And I heard Francis Chan say, he said, "That's all right. We weren't worshiping you."
That's good. That's good.
It's like, that to me, it sounds a little harsh,
Right.
coming from a pastor, but you're like, okay, yeah,
That's true.
okay.
That's true.
Because there are times where I don't like any of the songs. That doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them less. They're not my preference.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big issues that people will have with a church, to be like, oh, I didn't like it there. Why?
Right.
Because it didn't fit your preference.
Right.
And
Getting outside of yourself, it's when we get that inward focus instead of that outward focus, and how many different people worship like their car, their house, their job, their status,
the car is actually a great example. So, or I know some guys, they got some motorcycles, and they'll go out for a ride and they'll come back, and maybe they ride it for an hour and they come back and
wiping that thing down.
They're cleaning that thing for an hour.
Right.
So it's like, because they want to put it away perfectly spotless and clean, and then that way the next time they take it out, it's perfectly spotless and clean. And there's nothing wrong with that action.
Correct.
But think of that as, that's a little bit of that worship mentality. If you were approaching God like that, like your prayer is when you're riding it, and your worship is when you're just acknowledging, like, man, this, like, let me polish this, let me clean this,
Do they have that same posture for their Bible or their prayer time with God, and are they putting that same effort into the relationship with God? And I think that's an important thing.
It's funny because like you could dive into that a little more because there's something really, really foundational there. Like, when you're like ironing or cleaning your house or just doing these things that you have to do every day, there are great times to just be in the presence of God in those moments and have gratitude for all those things that you're having to.
Right. Do you lament mowing the grass, or are you thankful you have grass to mow?
Right. I enjoy mowing the grass. I do.
I don't enjoy it.
I don't know how much I worship God in those moments, but it's definitely, for me anyway, it's a great time to clear my mind and just remove all distractions and everything. But I want to kind of shift a little bit here, and kind of worship is, and what we've defined it as is a lifestyle and a way of praising God. And that kind of brings me to a word that a lot of people, could be a trigger word, submission, and part of our our worship is submitting to his authority, right? Understanding that we're not in control, and when we are in control, we typically make a mess of things, and being able to define that word in a, I don't want to say a clean way or a healthy way, but an accurate way.
Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah.
Jeez.
Thor and Star-Lord standing on the bridge of the ship.
Yeah.
It's like, everybody knows who's in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we do.
We're all clear on who's in charge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's me.
Right.
Of course it's you. Of course it's you.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of us, that's one of those, it's funny because it's true.
Right.
Be like, of course God's in charge. Here, just do this over here.
Right.
No, you got this.
Yep.
God. Like, I totally trust you, but I'm just going to move this thing over here.
Right.
And I'm going to do this thing. And no, like, Jesus, take the wheel. Go right ahead.
Yeah,
And,
you better make that left there.
yeah, exactly. Take the wheel as long as you're turning it right now. Why didn't you turn?
Yeah.
Recalculate.
Recalculating.
So that's how I see in my own life.
Yeah.
I'm not even pointing fingers.
Right.
In my own life, how much of I don't know that I'm a backseat driver when it comes to God.
Right.
I try to use a loose grip on the wheel. in the sense of,
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge I'm still holding on to the wheel.
Right.
And I make the joke, you show me a guy who says he's not a control freak, I'll show you a liar and a control freak.
Right.
But we're freaky about different parts of our life.
Right.
And it's not that I shudder to say, like, I'm not surrendering that to God or his will, but it's a much bigger task for me to surrender that to his will.
I think it's a big task for everybody that surrender kind of goes along with submission in that we like to, like you say, control freak. We like to control things because we want to know the outcome. We don't want to be surprised. We don't like surprises in our lives because we didn't plan for that. And then when we get that surprise, it really throws our plans for our life up in the air, and that's where the submission comes from, because we have our 30-day plan, 60-day plan, year plan, 3-year, 5-year. Where am I going to be in 10 years? Well, you don't know.
You don't.
I don't know. I can create a vision for what I think or what I would like to have happen, but the reality is I don't know what's going to happen as soon as we walk out of this recording set.
And the thing there is we, even when we're like, I trust God's timing, we're still thinking of it in the span of our lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah, when Jesus says,
from here
I'm
to the day
back.
we die, like everything, all of the things need to happen between now and the time I die.
Right.
Or before I die with enough time afterward to be
enjoy
able
it.
to enjoy it.
Right.
But that's the time frame God's got to have everything worked out, where it's like, if we were to draw a line, if we could get a huge piece of paper and draw a line all the way across it.
The timeline?
The timeline from, where time starts to where time's going to end, biblically speaking.
Right.
Where is God on that line?
He's the paper.
He's the paper.
Right.
He is the paper.
That's one of the best analogies I've ever heard.
And it's like,
yeah.
he's
Like
the paper.
we're the one little speck somewhere in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And he's the whole entire paper,
He's the paper.
Yeah. And for us to think that anything that we build or do is somehow outside of that line, not just outside of our little dot, because people build legacies. There's people that we remember in history, good or bad, that have left something, a mark on history, and for us to believe that any of that was their doing or outside of his control, I think is foolish on our part, and for us to think that, you said it, I think it was in the last one, maybe it was 2 episodes ago, where it was, he is your Lord, whether you acknowledge it or not. He is the Lord, and he's your Lord. And the same thing comes to when we can really truly like, okay, I'm really not in control here. I can control these aspects of my life, but the overall thing, that can be really liberating to some extent, I think.
It can
It's
also
scary.
it's very humbling
Yeah.
because a key component of submission is obedience, right? Um, and I'll put this in a way that I think people aren't going to like the way I say this.
Ooh, I like that.
Okay. Your dog, Miles.
Miles, puppy dog.
Okay. Miles is a good dog.
Mostly.
A little hyper, but he's a good dog, right?
Yeah.
We'll say things like that, like, oh, this is a good dog. What makes him a good dog?
Because he's obedient.
He's obedient.
Yeah.
Miles come, he doesn't growl at me first.
Right.
Miles come, that's why I'm not a cat person.
Right.
You know, hey, kitty, kitty, turns into,
Yeah.
you know,
I say, come here, kitty.
I've long said if a cat had a middle finger, it would use it frequently. It is just, I know there's people out there like, no, I call my cat and it comes. Okay. That's fine. I'll pray for your salvation. But a dog, this sounds really cruel, but like you can call a dog over, thump it on the head, it'll run away, and you can call it back over.
And it'll come right back, yeah.
And it comes back because it's obedient to its master.
Right.
And nobody wants to think like I'm the dog in this equation.
But we are.
But we're not even the dog. Like we're the flea on the dog's back, for crying out loud. We're hitching a ride on the obedience of others sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's what makes. Where does that worship fall in? Where can we really say that I'm a follower of God if I'm not going to be obedient? And delayed obedience is disobedience.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's if I'm not going to, or because you hear people say like, "Oh, I'm looking for a new word from God."
Yeah.
Why don't you just do the ones He already gave you?
Yeah.
There's a whole book.
Right.
66 of them, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Like, read one of these other established principles. God's not going to give you a new word if you're not doing the existing words.
Yeah.
And that is obedience. That is submission. How do I submit my will to His? Is to be obedient to the things He's telling me to do. Now, I'm not perfect in that.
Right.
I struggle in it. I'm the cat. Like,
Is that why you hate them? Because
you got food over there?
Yeah.
Like, okay, pet me. No.
Yeah.
Like, touch me. No.
That's enough. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so I think we don't want to recognize that which we would value out of others, that obedience.
Right.
We're not willingly giving to God.
Right. Or is required of us on some level.
And I would say that obedience is a requirement of
100%
of this process of sanctification. That if you're not obedient, you will struggle to become what God's calling you to be.
That was a pretty big word you used there, Dave. You want to dig into that one?
Sanctification.
Yeah. I mean, I think we wrapped up submission pretty good. We're transitioning into obedience, but sanctification, that's one of those, if you've made it this far in the podcast, we'll get into some real words now. Sanctify, because when I was first a new Christian, and in many ways, I still think I am not eating solid foods. I know that I've grown. I can look back and see how far I've come, but then I look forward and see how far I've got to go, and that's humbling.
Well, but I think that is the process of sanctification, because even Paul says, in the New Testament, the author of the New Testament, most of the New Testament, he says like, "Oh, what a wretched man I am."
Yeah.
Like he's the closer you get to Christ, the more you realize how much you pale in comparison to Christ. Like, that's like, I have this big hole in my backyard.
Yeah.
Well, someone may look at that hole and be like, dude, that's a huge hole. When you compare it to the Grand Canyon, it's like, bro,
Yeah.
Like, shovel some dirt in that.
I can compare myself to you and be like, I'm not that far off. But then when I compare myself to Jesus, like, there's
Wow,
there's
I
no
suck.
there's no comparison. There's nothing even close.
Yeah. So we will never become fully sanctified
Mm-hmm.
until we're in glory, until we've left this world and we are united with our Lord and Savior.
Mm-hmm.
There is a process from the day you choose to recognize Jesus' lordship in your life. The day you choose, like, God, I suck at all this,
Yeah.
and I need your help, and I need what you have. You recognize that. That's day one of your sanctification process. And the sanctification process it's like rinsing out a sponge.
Oh, yeah.
Think about it.
A sponge with ink in it.
So,
Yeah.
like, there are going to be times where God's going to squeeze that sponge of your life, and underneath the clean water, and He is going to just dump loads of garbage out of you.
Yeah.
And then there are times where the clean water is just pouring over you, and if nothing else, it's just keeping you where you're at.
Yeah.
And then something's going to come along, and you're going to get rinsed out again.
Yeah.
And that's that sanctification process. Like you said, you can look back and go, man, I ain't over there anymore.
Yeah.
But you can also recognize, man, I feel like I have so much further to go.
Yeah.
But yet other people at a different point in their sanctification may look at you and go, hey, help me get where you're at.
Yeah. And that's what we need to be doing to other people. We need to have that community around us to be able to, not to compare and contrast, because we know that's a really a bad trap to fall into.
Yeah, comparison's a trap.
It is. But it is a good thing to shine a light on the sanctification process in your life. I don't want to be someone else. I want to be my own person, my own version of me.
Oh, the person that God created.
Correct. And we're all created different. But for me, when I think about the person I want to be or something like that, I'm grabbing different attributes from other people in my life or other people that I respect or have, they've been presented I may not know them. I'm thinking about different pastors that, we watch or I podcast, Bible Project comes to mind. Tim Mackey is
A genius.
a genius, and the way that he explains things and the way that whole production, there's been a lot of sanctification for me through just listening to their 10 years of podcasting, and I would never compare myself to Mackey because there's not a comparison there.
Because he speaks Hebrew and you don't?
He speaks Hebrew and
I've heard him sing in Hebrew.
yeah, but for me to even try to grasp that idea, I never went down that path, so I can't compare myself to that. I never went to a Bible school, so I can't compare recall is a bad word, but the ability to recall Bible and stuff like that. I am not good at that, and that's a whole nother story. I'm great at paraphrasing or saying like, like throw a couple lines out like "it is finished." Well, they knew what that meant, but why have you forsaken me? They knew that led to a psalm. So I'm like, the one. I think it's Corinthians, Colossians. But I think seeing where other people are is a good way to kind of create that North Star, that true north for us to do, and that aids in the sanctification process.
Yeah, so I think we tend to, we either see ourselves, we diminish how far we've come, or we have a tendency to assume we've traveled further
Then we
have. And what's funny is chances are in the areas where you're diminishing your progress, you've probably come further than you thought.
Yeah.
And the areas where you think you've got a better hand on it,
Yeah.
you've probably not gone nearly as far as you think
Right.
you have.
Stroka had that really good in his Tuesday night, talking about being humbled, moving from one position. Like, God, you took me from up here to down here to teach me something. And he was like, felt God tell him in that moment, like, what is this up here, down here thing? I'm just moved you from one side to the other, or one position to another. This up here, down here, that's, you created that
you
in your
created that.
mind. And how many times we've done that. I just did it. Comparing myself, by saying I'm not comparing myself, I am comparing myself because someone has a larger breadth of knowledge of the Bible and Hebrew scripture and stuff like that.
Well, knowledge does not equal heart posture.
True. I'd like to believe his heart posture is equal to
Oh,
his knowledge.
and that's not a criticism of him.
No.
You can have knowledge.
I hear you.
But what is it? Knowledge puffs up and Nick, you might need to look that one up for me.
Yeah.
Knowledge, wisdom builds up and knowledge puffs up. Where it's essentially like you can, because I've been around people that I heard them. I think it was Matt Chandler said spiritual bulimics, where they just cram all this knowledge just so they can vomit it up on somebody else and be like, oh, what about this and what about this and what? What do you mean you don't know what chapter that's in?
Right.
Corinthians 8:1. Knowledge puffs up while
Love builds up. So it is what you made the comment. Yeah, oh, you didn't go to a Bible school,
right?
Okay, I did. I went to school and learned a lot. Why am I learning that? Like, what is it so that I can walk into a room and be like, smartest person in here, and use it to teach down to people and speak down to people. Like, have you not read that?
Right.
Whereas, I heard it on a podcast recently, was learning for the purpose of helping others understand. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Because where I have felt called, going to a graduate program for biblical studies, and I'm not bashing academia, but when you're in a graduate program, you're surrounded by academics. You're surrounded by people who love the books, and it is very, very clear that some people just, I don't want to say that they use big words.
Yeah.
When a series of smaller words would have made more sense. And my thing was, let me get into these environments. Let me get into these circles, absorb all this information.
So that
process
you can get a
it.
bigger circles.
and then be able to, as Paul says, like, become whoever I'm around. So, where it's like, if I'm talking to a guy who's got no education, he was a high school dropout, and he's a laborer of some sort.
Right.
He's uneducated in the world's mind.
Right.
Doesn't mean he's not educated in the world, but in the world's vision, he doesn't have an education. Okay, well, he probably doesn't know much about eschatology, which I've written papers on, or pneumatology.
Right.
Well, but I can chew up those complex words and explain them in a way that people understand, that everyday people around me, that the people I have proximity to, that I can explain things in a way so that they can feel the understanding. I mean, so it's, man, I feel like I just went down a whole rabbit hole.
You definitely went down a rabbit hole. I'm not sure.
I'm like looking around, I'm like, I don't even know where we're at.
How did I get here? This is not my beautiful house. Right, so sanctification, reel it in, Dave, reeling it in. Sanctification is the process of growing in our faith, growing in a direction towards the ultimate salvation, which comes at the end of our life when we're
Fully
reunited-
sanctified.
fully sanctified and united with God for eternity, right? So when I was a new believer, I used to think like
Back in the 1900s?
yeah, back in the 1900s. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was 2000s. But I got sanctification and justification confused a lot, and it was like, what's the difference? You're there. It was hard for me to, and it just came from just continually reading same things over and over, the Bible, of course, but other things like sanctification is the process of becoming
Becoming more like Jesus.
becoming more like Jesus. Justification is that moment. Is that the moment that I said yes, or the moment he died on the cross?
Right?
That-
Yeah. See that's
That's
and some denominations would choose to be on different sides of that question.
right. Or is it the moment I got baptized? Those. That's where I was. I struggled with that, and I'm not sure there's a right answer to that.
Well, how about this? Because I feel like we need to plant some flags in the ground to establish exactly what each one of those markers are. Because
Right.
you're saying, is it the moment I accepted,
I acknowledged.
acknowledged the lordship of Christ,
Right.
or the moment that he died on the cross for us?
Right.
Like which of those? So let's take a quick break and come back and we'll jump in on those flag posts.
All right.
Our sponsor, the Cozy Quokka. Because we need to stop pretending that jeans are comfortable. As I sit here in my jeans. Look, no one's fooled by your business casual sweatpants. The Cozy Quokka makes loungewear so soft you'll feel your crotches hugging you back. Perfect for work calls, naps, or judging people on social media. Use the code CROTCHHUG for 20% off your first order. The Cozy Quokka, because real pants are a scam.
We're back from that wonderful advertiser.
And we were talking about planting flags.
Planting flags, we were getting into kind of the difference between sanctification and justification, and we're like, hey, let's
Because
define.
sanctification's a process.
Yes, justification is a one-time action, right?
Yeah, I would say it is a one-time action, and you were basically saying, when is that?
Right. When does that happen?
When is that action? And it's hard to really have the conversation about when is it before we have the conversation about what is it.
What is it?
And
So what does it mean to be justified?
So again, when we're talking about what some of these words mean, and we have to get out of our use of words
Our 2025 dictionary?
and get back to something from 2,000 years ago, and we're talking about the first century church and first century writings and
First century in another country, another part of the world.
a completely different part of
Yeah.
the world, a different society.
And sometimes that's very difficult for us to do.
Yeah, we have to, as we hear it all the time, the there and then.
Yeah.
What was it like there? What was it like then?
Right.
So that we can understand the words. So on that break, we pulled up a verse. I think you have it there.
Yeah.
In 1 Peter, Peter being one of Jesus's disciples. This is a letter that he wrote.
He was the slower one.
He was the slower. Oh yeah, racing to the tomb. I outran you. I'm going to record it forever. and some of you didn't get that joke. But if you'll read that,
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit we want to unpack from it.
1 Peter 1, verse 18 and 19. For you know that you were redeemed from your empty way of life inherited from your ancestors, not with perishable things like silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of an unblemished and spotless lamb.
Okay, so it talks about redeemed, and I think the only time we use the word redeemed is when like we redeem a coupon,
yeah.
or a code,
Right.
Which
10% off.
Which I would say, hold on to that thought. We redeem a value. I'm going to give you this coupon in place of that value.
Okay.
Okay, so it's substitutionary.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a good word. Yeah.
So again, hold on to that. We'll put that over on this shelf over here.
Okay.
And but what is in place for that redemption is this spotless lamb.
Right.
So again, Peter grew up Jewish, followed a Jewish rabbi named Jesus, and he's speaking to a lot of people who, even if they didn't necessarily grow up Jewish in faith, they grew up in a culture heavily affected by
They understood his
Judaism.
context
Yes.
in that, yeah.
So
The
Jews have different sacrificial offerings to God. And for the atonement of sins, there is a sacrifice of a spotless lamb, where this spotless, perfect lamb is going to be sacrificed for the punishment of the sins that they had committed. So instead of killing me, we're going to kill this thing and offer this up as a sacrifice.
Right.
But it can't be the sick, janky one.
Right.
Like, it's got to be your best one. It's got to be the spotless one. No miscolored, no janky leg, no hitch in its giddy up, nothing.
Right.
So at birth, rabbis are looking at these newborn lambs to go, okay, that one, bring it here. We're going to watch it grow up a little bit, and then we'll decide. So they're looking for that perfect spotless lamb.
What's the difference between the perfect spotless lamb and the firstborn?
Oh man.
Sorry.
No, tangent. We can come back to it, but
Okay.
So
let you finish
all
your
right,
thought before I
so-
derail this one.
Yeah, because you will. All right, so now we have this substitution, this value, this redemptive. So the spotless lamb had a redemptive value. That was a temporary atonement for my sins. We're going to have to kill another one later.
Right.
And
do you know
I'm
how
gonna
often
sin
that
again.
happened?
No, I don't remember.
Was that like the once a year or was that like once a week?
That was like a once a year, like the once a week things, like the doves.
The doves, right.
So again, not a sick dove.
Is that where they get the confession in the Catholic from? Like, man, sorry.
No.
Tangent.
Man,
I'm sorry. Go.
like I'm the one with the ADD. So all right. So that's they sacrificed that lamb to be in right standing with God for a period of time.
For the past sins, we'll say year. That may not be correct. We'll research.
So that substitutionary offering, that sacrificial lamb,
Right.
isn't that weird, a phrase we use today that actually has biblical roots?
Yeah.
So that sacrificial lamb was a real thing. So that redemptive value was temporary. What Peter's saying is there was an ultimate and perfect lamb
Right.
that was slain for your redemption. That was Jesus. Fully God, fully man, fully perfect in his humanity, took our place on the cross for all of our sins, ever committed, ever will be committed, past, present, future sins. That punishment was poured out on Jesus. So from that, we've been redeemed, That coupon has been cashed in for the value of my entire eternal life and soul.
Okay.
For the value of each and every one of your souls for all eternity. If we choose to cash that coupon in and claim that redemptive value
Okay.
by choosing to acknowledge the lordship of Christ, but to plant that flag, what is justification? We become justified because God didn't die for just those who claim His name. God died for Jesus died for everybody.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to get into something there.
We choose what to do with that, but His decision was for all of us.
Right. So
And-
when Jesus died, he died as that redemptive figure.
The
And-
perfect lamb.
He justified all of humanity in that moment.
Yes.
That's what I hear you saying.
To plant the flag,
The justified is when Jesus died.
we
for us.
became justified
We became
at that point.
Humanity became justified.
Our salvation is when we choose.
So, well, then what's the difference between the justification and the salvation? You know, okay, if Jesus died, justified all of humanity in that moment.
Okay.
We
so
weren't. Wait.
It's a pyramid, not a pyramid scheme, but a pyramid. So we're sitting at a triangular shaped table.
Okay,
Right.
right.
So if you take one of these sides away, the table isn't going to stand right because you can't have the process of sanctification
Right.
without choosing to be saved.
Right. The salvation.
The salvation, the sanctification,
And
the
the
justification. Without Jesus dying on the cross, there's no justification.
It's ironic we have a triangle table this week for that.
That is crazy.
But
God's plan.
I was going to say, almost like somebody else is in charge.
right.
So you take away any one of the sides,
Yeah.
it's incomplete because it is. Oh, and we even have a triune God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I mean, like if we want to get
How'd this
all,
happen? We didn't plan that.
So it's without, well, and even with that, like the Holy Spirit's, the processes of sanctification, the justification through Jesus
And the salvation.
Yeah, you know, so they're like.
We definitely didn't plan that.
So, anyways, yeah. Are they different things? Yes, they're different things. Are they codependent? Yeah, I would say they are because if you take any one of them out, it's not going to work correctly.
Okay.
Sanctification is a process of becoming more like Jesus. We are justified by the blood of Jesus, and that salvation. That's our choice.
Okay.
That's freely offered,
Right.
but we have to willingly take.
That's very good. That's really good. I'm glad you landed it like that. We were hitting different things the whole time, but that's really good because we didn't plan that at all. But I'm glad that I hope that somebody else got that out of that. You know, again, if you've been here this long in the podcast, then you just got a really good nugget. You know, and that. Education is paying off, Dave. Way to bring it down to the layman. So the sanctification is the process that we go through after we've accepted the salvation, right?
Yep.
That was justified by Jesus 2,000 plus
So
years
let's
ago.
take one of the rabbit holes
Okay.
that's on our paper here.
Okay.
That sanctification process. There's a phrase in Scripture that we use: "Die to self."
Die to self. It's
Choose.
yeah.
Choose to pick up your cross every day.
Right.
That is one of those phrases that Christians use that if you're new to Christianity or depending upon the denomination you grew up in, that is a foreign thought. What do you mean die to self? Like not kill yourself,
Right.
like die to self.
It's like we're not eating his flesh and drinking his blood.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's it's if we're willing to die to self, that's part of the process of sanctification. Like I have really no role in becoming sanctified. The Spirit's going to sanctify me through.
You're receiving it.
Yeah, I'm receiving
daily.
it. I have a choice of whether to receive it, whether to accept it, whether to decide to turn and walk away, things like that. So
Sure.
dying to self puts me in a heart posture. That's the a little bit of that lordship, obedience stuff that we've talked about, where it's like, okay, I don't want to do this in my flesh, in my personal sensibility.
Right.
I don't want to do this. I don't like it, but God's calling me to it. I believe
Yeah.
God is either in His written word
Right.
or through the moving of the Spirit
Yeah.
has led me down a path, because the Word of God is a lamp unto my feet,
Right.
to lead me down a path, and I may not like it. I may not like the path I'm on, but I like the point I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. I think that's modeled in the Garden of Gethsemane by Jesus himself.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he prayed like, if take this cup away from me, but not my will, your
Yours.
will. You know, and that's
a prayer right there.
that is a prayer, and that leads us back to submission. You know, obedience, and it's everything kind of ties in together very well, man.
So I think another phrase that we use that I've heard people get hung up on, and this is going to be a kind of, may seem like a disconnected thought, but it's going to come back to, the Lord, acknowledging lordship and
Yeah.
and obedience and things like that. Is I've had guys who are well into this sanctification process, and they'll come to me and say, I can't wrap my head around this. Like, God is this loving Father. Jesus willingly went to the cross for my sins. And I accept all of that.
Right.
Why does the Bible tell me to fear God?
Yeah, that's the beginning is the beginning of
wisdom.
understanding
Yeah,
and
the beginning of wisdom.
is the fear of the Lord, and that's a really great question. That was something that I struggled with myself. Like a friend of mine back in the day said, the Old Testament is about how much God hates you. The New Testament is about how much He loves you. And I don't think that's very true.
It's the same God.
Yeah, but the fear of God is it's another one of those trigger words, trigger phrases that on the surface people look at and they just don't understand it. They don't understand the reference, where it comes from, why it's there, and I think that it's ultimately just submitting to His authority. The fear of the Lord is I think having a healthy fear to understand that guy can squash you at any given time. Not guy, he's a whatever.
Right.
Again, we're not in control, and that fear, I guess the word fear is what gets people kind of hung
Right.
up.
Because we use words differently than
Right.
the people who wrote those verses.
Right.
You're talking Proverbs 3,000-ish years, 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago.
Right.
And the words have been translated between languages, and the best we could come up with is fear.
Fear.
But again, I think some people won't like the analogy again because it's overly simplified. But again, Miles, your dog, he's obedient. Is he obedient because you fear him or feed him? Or is there a little bit of natural fear in the dog for you?
Yeah.
Larger? Because you think about it, if Miles is on the couch or jumps on somebody when they walk in the front door,
Yeah.
and we even use the phrase bark
Yeah.
at Miles to get down,
Yeah.
what's his response? Is to recoil and look at you.
Yeah.
Like, I've displeased
That's funny.
the master.
He was doing something the other day. So just that that dog and his personality,
Mm-hmm.
but he was like messing with Logan a little bit.
But he's part lab, so
But he was doing something that he knew was wrong, and like as he's doing it, he stopped and turned around and looked at me like, "Am I getting ready to get yelled at here?" Yeah, you know. But sorry.
So, but that's exactly it. So I think of, you know, you look at some of these really highly trained dogs walking. You know, you'll see trainers walking with a dog,
Yeah.
and that dog is not watching where it's walking.
Yeah.
It's walking with its master, with its eyes fixed on the eyes of the master.
Right.
Where am I going? Where am I going?
Just waiting.
Because I trust you,
Right.
I can walk this way without even looking.
Right.
Because you're moving in that direction, I'm moving in that direction.
So is that a fear from them?
It is.
Like when they were initially, you know, as an infant dog,
But
puppy?
again, how do we define fear? We define fear as, oh, I'm scared, it's a
Yeah.
bad thing.
Right.
Like we define fear as terror.
Okay.
In the original text, fear is defined as awe.
Okay.
Like,
Whoa. Yeah. Like he's so powerful, so impressive that
yeah.
I need to follow.
Like if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon,
have
like
not.
I remember driving to the Grand Canyon
Yeah.
through the middle of nowhere thinking, I get it. It's a big hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Like I knew it was going to be big. I knew it was going to be cool, and we like hiking, and we were excited to go.
Yeah.
But I was completely unprepared for what I saw, and there was a moment where I was like
Yeah.
I had no control. The breath came in, and I was in awe of what I was looking at.
Yeah.
That is fear of the Lord.
That's really good.
I was in awe of His creation in that moment, and cognitively trying to connect the two.
Right.
So that way, so again, in terms of our sanctification and everything, it all wraps together. Is that visual of the dog who, you know, God's leading me in this direction. God's taking me to this place,
Keeping our eyes focused.
but my eyes are on Him,
Right.
not on where I'm going. My eyes are on Him.
Right.
Because maybe someone else would say this direction I'm heading is unsafe, but if He says it's safe, it is.
Right.
And our 2025 westernized culture, you know, you are your own person. You have your own truth. You know, I you know, steer by no man's compass but my own.
Yeah.
But that takes our eyes off of Him.
Definitely.
And everything about what we're talking through today, worship.
Right.
What greater worship is there than obedience?
Yeah.
And obedience is going to lead to sanctification.
Right.
Like it's all meshed together.
So is that where we're wrapping this up with? You know, I mean, we've kind of we hit on prayer, we hit on faith, you know, worship, sanctification, justification, you know, fear of God, a little bit of humility in there. What's the something to chew on for everybody this week? Having a healthy awe of the Lord.
Yeah, I guess. Where are you looking?
What's your focus?
Yeah, if you're the dog in the equation, where are you looking? Are you looking at the master to direct your steps?
Are you yanking the chain?
Or are you at the end of the leash?
Right.
And I know if I look back at the landscape of my sanctification, I shudder at the number of times I'm at the end of the leash and God's like, no,
Yeah.
no.
Right.
And all while saying, I want to have my eyes on the master.
Right.
So sanctification is about bringing ourselves in step with Him, getting our eyes fixed on Him, and realizing, you know, again, that He is, I'm not. The closer I get, the more I'm going to see my inadequacies in comparison to.
Right.
And being less concerned about what's around me and my situation and my circumstance. So I would say that's the thing to really chew on at the end of this is where, you know, like, what are you looking at?
What's your focus, and if it's not on Him, what do you need to do in your life to avert your focus to him, to get that awe, that healthy fear, right?
So,
Good.
hey, I'm Dave. He's Ben. This is Something to Chew On. We'll see you next time.
This has been a presentation of Something to Chew On, a production of Rev 21 Media LC, created by the three amigos, Ben Garcia, Dave Drum, and Nick Smiloff. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep chewing on the good stuff.